Inside 10 most dangerous prisons in the world, where the cartels rule. La Modelo Prison, Bogotá, Colombia. Hit subscribe, like, and comment now before this video disappears, because once you hear what really happened inside La Modelo Prison, you'll understand why some people don't live to tell these stories. The walls of La Modelo rise out of Bogotá like a concrete citadel, but what goes on behind its razor wire is closer to a war zone than a correctional facility. Opened in 1958 as a national model for rehabilitation, it quickly became synonymous with overcrowding, cartel power, and a level of violence so extreme that even hardened criminals whispered about it. Human rights groups, journalists, and government commissions have documented a grim reality. Paramilitary groups and criminal gangs have carved the prison into fiefdoms, complete with their own courts, soldiers, and executioners. By the late 1990s, La Modelo was bursting with more than 5,000 inmates in space designed for barely half that number. The patios, open yards inside the prison, were divided like battle zones. Some sectors were controlled by right-wing paramilitaries from the Auto Defenses Unidas de Colombia AUC, others by guerrilla sympathizers, and still others by common criminal gangs. Guards stood at gates and towers but rarely ventured deep inside. Many were underpaid, intimidated, or corrupted. Amnesty International, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and Colombian press outlets warned that the state had effectively ceded control. On the morning of April 27, 2000, years of tension exploded. According to official reports and later court filings, the spark was the killing of an inmate named Yema Ospina Flores, linked to the Los Priscos gang. He had allegedly been acting as an informant for paramilitaries, identifying rival leaders. Word got out and retribution came swiftly. Around 800 AUC-aligned inmates, some under the influence of Johan Jairo Velázquez Vázquez, Popeye, Pablo Escobar's former hitman, mobilized with pistols, rifles, grenades, and makeshift explosives smuggled inside. Witnesses described them moving with military discipline from patio to patio. For roughly 12 hours the prison became a battlefield. Grenades blew holes in walls, rifles cracked from cell block windows, inmates stabbed each other with homemade knives and machetes. Guards reportedly fired warning shots but did little else. By dawn, 32 prisoners lay dead, at least 17 more were wounded, and 17 were officially missing, later suspected of being dismembered and flushed into the sewer system. Photographs from inside showed scorched walls, shattered doors, and piles of confiscated weapons and AUC insignia. International observers called it one of the worst massacres in a Latin American prison in decades. The horror didn't end there. As journalist Gineth Bedoya Lima tried to investigate weapons trafficking and the massacre's aftermath, she was kidnapped outside La Modelo's gates on May 25, 2000. Then tortured and sexually assaulted. Her attackers were later linked to paramilitary figures operating inside the prison. Bedoya's case became emblematic of the risks journalists faced when exposing Colombia's carceral underworld. In 2021, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights found the Colombian state responsible for failing to protect her. In the years after the massacre, human rights groups pressed for forensic searches. In 2016, Colombia's Attorney General's office confirmed a grisly rumor long whispered by inmates and families. Over 100 dismembered bodies had been dumped into La Modelo's sewer system, many from the 1990s and 2000s. Not all were inmates. Some were believed to be visitors or civilians who vanished after entering the prison. Authorities recovered bone fragments, skulls, and clothing from underground pipes. Conditions inside remained appalling. Cells designed for 4 housed 10. Water and sanitation were unreliable. Despite periodic crackdowns, weapons, cell phones, and drugs continued to circulate. Each patio still had its own order, enforced by inmate bosses. International agencies repeatedly called La Modelo an example of state abandonment, where gangs and paramilitaries acted with impunity. Even in the 2010s and 2020s, the violence continued. During the COVID-19 pandemic, on March 21, 2020, inmates protested overcrowding and inadequate health care. Guards opened fire. According to Colombia's Justice Ministry, 23 inmates were killed and 83 injured in a single night. Videos smuggled out showed flames and smoke rising from cell blocks as gunshots echoed. Directors of the prison have been targeted too. In May 2024, Elmer Fernandez, who had been appointed to clean up La Modelo, was assassinated by motorcycle gunmen while returning home from work. Police suspected links to the same organized crime networks he had tried to disrupt. Each of these events, the 2000 massacre, the kidnapping of a journalist, the mass graves in the sewers, the 2020 riot, the 2024 director's murder, is documented by reputable sources. Colombian court records, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, Human Rights Watch, BBC and Time magazine reports. They paint a picture of a prison where official authority is fragile and violent actors set the rules. For viewers, the shock isn't just the body count. It's the systematic way a supposedly national model prison became a cartel-run fortress. The patios are like neighborhoods carved up by militias. Smuggling routes operate like supply chains. Extortion, drug sales, and even assassinations can be ordered from inside. Guards who resist are transferred or killed. Visitors, lawyers, and journalists have been threatened or attacked. And yet La Modelo keeps functioning. Thousands of men wake up there every day under the control of inmate hierarchies that mimic armies. Some prisoners pay for protection. Others are forced into service. The state enters only for roll calls, special raids, or to collect the dead. In the closing hours of April 27, 2000, as the massacre wound down, survivors described guards finally regaining a semblance of control, but only after the dominant faction had achieved its objectives. Blood was hosed off floors. Cell doors were welded back into place. Official communiques downplayed the event as a disturbance. Families outside searched lists for their loved ones' names and found them missing. Those families still search. Some attend forensic exhumations of the sewers. Others pin photographs to fences outside the prison gates. Gineth Bedoya still campaigns for justice for women attacked for speaking out. International NGOs still file reports. But inside La Modelo, power remains diffuse, and violence is never far away. This is the story you're about to see unfold in 10 chapters. Real places, real events, no rumors. In Chapter 2 we'll move to the next prison on the list. Another stronghold where gangs or cartels, not the state, set the rules. But the legacy of La Modelo lingers as a warning. A prison can become a battlefield, a graveyard, and a criminal headquarters all at once. And the world may only find out years later when the bodies rise from the drains. Prison 2 of 10 most dangerous prisons in the world, where the cartels rule. San Pedro Prison, La Paz, Bolivia. Subscribe, like, and comment before we go any further, because what you're about to hear about San Pedro Prison in Bolivia sounds like fiction, but every detail is drawn from real investigations and first-hand accounts. In the heart of La Paz, tucked behind colonial-era facades, stands San Pedro Prison, a facility so unusual that journalists and tourists once paid bribes to enter. Officially, it is a national penitentiary. In reality, it has operated for decades as a self-governed microcity where the Bolivian state controls only the perimeter. Inside, inmates, including drug traffickers and cartel intermediaries, run everything from housing to security to cocaine production. Even the cells are bought and sold on an internal property market. By the early 2000s, San Pedro held roughly 1,500 to 2,000 prisoners, far beyond its intended capacity. Guards remained at the gates. Once inside, prisoners were on their own. Each of the 8 main sections, called sectors or pabellons, was run by an elected delegate who collected fees, enforced rules, and negotiated with other sectors. Powerful traffickers and cartel couriers bought the best accommodations, complete apartments with kitchens, cable TV, and sometimes private bathrooms, while the poorest inmates slept in hallways or stairwells. Journalists such as Rusty Young, who wrote Marching Powder after living inside San Pedro, described a functioning society. Restaurants, shops, even schools for inmates' children, because many prisoners lived there with their families. But beneath the surface was intimidation, extortion, and violence. Drug production thrived. Visitors could buy high-purity cocaine made inside workshops hidden behind cell doors. Police, underpaid and overstretched, looked the other way in exchange for bribes. Several high-profile incidents showed how dangerous this arrangement could be. In 2003, a riot between rival groups left at least 3 inmates dead and dozens injured. Bolivian newspapers reported that weapons and grenades were smuggled in with food deliveries. In 2012, a fire during a fight killed 8 prisoners and injured more than a dozen others. Human rights groups documented frequent beatings and occasional disappearances, with little state investigation. Inmates accused of sexual offenses or who failed to pay protection fees could be lynched or expelled from sectors. For a time, San Pedro became a dark tourist attraction. Backpackers in La Paz swapped tips on which inmate guides to pay for a tour. Visitors were shown cocaine labs, prison markets, and the best view of the city from the roof. In 2009, the Bolivian government formally banned these tours after several assaults on tourists and an international outcry. But the ban did not dismantle the internal power structure. It only drove it deeper underground. By the 2010s, Bolivia's own anti-narcotics forces acknowledged that San Pedro was a key node in the drug trade. Traffickers sentenced for smuggling cocaine across the Andes continued to run operations from their cells, using visitors and corrupt guards as couriers. The line between prisoner and entrepreneur blurred. The prison's tax on cell sales and businesses funded the delegates' enforcement squads, who acted like militias within the walls. In August 2013, San Pedro's hidden dangers exploded into public view when a fight between two rival groups, one controlling part of the cocaine trade inside, the other accused of extorting families, turned into a full-scale battle. Inmates armed with knives, sticks, and improvised explosives fought for hours. At least 30 prisoners were killed and more than 50 injured, according to Bolivia's Interior Ministry. Fire broke out in several sections. Families waiting outside for visiting hours heard the screams but were held back by police. The dead included several children who had been living inside with their parents. International media, including the BBC and The Guardian, ran headlines about the prison massacre that Bolivia forgot. Investigations revealed that the rival groups had been stockpiling weapons and that guards had done little to stop it. The massacre also exposed how many minors were living inside the prison, a practice rooted in Bolivia's policy of allowing children to stay with incarcerated parents if no one else could care for them. After the 2013 massacre, the government announced reforms: tighter control at the gates, transfers of high-risk inmates, and construction of a new high-security facility outside La Paz. Yet San Pedro remains open. In 2022, Bolivia's ombudsman again reported severe overcrowding, ongoing drug activity, and violence inside. Former inmates told reporters that nothing fundamental had changed. The internal economy and cartel connections persisted. For investigators, San Pedro is a nightmare. Each sector is effectively a cartel fiefdom, but because prisoners elect their own delegates and handle disputes, the state has plausible deniability. When violence erupts, it is blamed on inmate conflicts, not systemic neglect. For traffickers, this arrangement is ideal. They can continue business under the protection of fellow inmates and corrupt intermediaries. Standing outside San Pedro today, you can still see wives and children lined up with baskets of food and goods. The graffiti on the walls tells two stories: saints painted beside cartel emblems, slogans about justice next to drawings of rifles. At night, lights flicker in the windows of what look like small apartments. Apartments where deals are cut, bribes are collected, and cocaine is refined in hidden rooms. For our story, San Pedro shows a different face of cartel power. Unlike La Modelo, where paramilitary factions turned the prison into a battlefield, San Pedro turned itself into a city where the cartel economy thrives under an informal social contract. But the danger is no less real. When that contract breaks down, massacres follow. In the final week of August 2013, after the bodies had been counted and the smoke cleared, officials sealed off one wing of the prison. Rumors spread that one of the sector delegates, a man known only as El Ingeniero, had fled through a service tunnel with a list of corrupt officials who had been taking bribes. Police denied the story. Families whispered that the list still existed somewhere inside. As the sun sets over La Paz, the prison's clock tower casts a long shadow over the cobblestone streets. Vendors pack up their stalls. Children leave school. Inside, the sectors reorganize after yet another riot. And somewhere behind those walls, a secret ledger may hold the names of the people who let it all happen. Prison 3 of the most dangerous prisons in the world, where the cartels rule. El Rodeo Prison, Guatire, Venezuela. Subscribe, like, and comment right now before this video gets buried, because what you're about to learn about El Rodeo Prison is the kind of story that powerful people in Venezuela hoped would never be told. An hour outside Caracas, along a dusty road lined with eucalyptus trees, the walls of El Rodeo rise like a forgotten fortress. Officially known as Centro Penitenciario El Rodeo 1 and 2, the complex has long been a symbol of Venezuela's prison crisis. Overcrowding, corruption, and gang dominance so extreme that in 2011 it erupted into one of the deadliest standoffs in the country's history. By 2011, El Rodeo housed more than 5,000 inmates in space designed for about 1,200. Arms trafficking was rampant. Inmates smuggled in pistols, rifles, grenades, even automatic weapons. Guards were outnumbered and often on the payroll of PRANs, prison gang bosses who ruled each wing. Human rights groups like the Venezuelan Prison Observatory (OVP) had been warning for years that the state had effectively lost control of its penitentiaries. El Rodeo became the most vivid example. On June 12, 2011, a fight broke out between rival factions during visiting hours. Witnesses heard gunfire echo across the yards. The OVP later reported that the conflict began after a shipment of weapons intended for one group was intercepted by another. The clash quickly escalated. Inmates barricaded cell blocks, seized hostages, and exchanged fire with guards. The Interior Ministry sent in the National Guard to retake control. What followed was a siege that lasted nearly a month. For weeks, gunfire and explosions rattled the hills around Guatire. Helicopters circled overhead. Families camped outside the gates with signs pleading for information about their loved ones. Human Rights Watch cited testimonies of visitors beaten or threatened, and inmates who were denied food and medical care as the siege dragged on. Officially, at least 22 people were killed. Unofficial counts from NGOs put the number much higher. Venezuelan media published blurry cell phone videos of bodies carried out under sheets, children crying behind police cordons, and inmates waving white flags from windows. The siege revealed just how well-armed and organized the PRANs had become. Security forces recovered pistols, shotguns, assault rifles, grenades, and hundreds of rounds of ammunition. They also found tunnels linking different cell blocks and caches of cash and drugs. The OVP reported that guards themselves had been complicit in smuggling weapons and running extortion rackets. In the aftermath, the government vowed to humanize the prison system. Some prisoners were transferred. New Bolivarian prisons were announced. But El Rodeo remained a symbol of chaos. In 2012 and 2013, further riots and murders occurred. Even as late as 2016, journalists documented inmates still openly carrying weapons and PRANs controlling entire blocks. In 2023, the Venezuelan army raided another notorious facility, Tocorón prison, exposing a full criminal city run by the Tren de Aragua gang, a reminder that El Rodeo's model of inmate rule had spread. For ordinary Venezuelans, El Rodeo's story is not just about a prison but about a parallel state. The PRANs inside ran extortion rings outside, ordered kidnappings and laundered money. Families of inmates paid rent for a place to sleep or protection from attacks. If you couldn't pay, you were at the mercy of inmate enforcers. Guards at the perimeter acted as gatekeepers but rarely interfered beyond collecting bribes. One detail still haunts families. During the 2011 siege, the government shut off communications and refused to release casualty lists for days. Mothers outside banged on the gates, holding up photos of their sons. Some never got answers. In 2015, a group of women who had lost relatives at El Rodeo formed a victims committee to demand investigations. Their petitions remain largely unanswered. Today, the road to El Rodeo is lined with food stalls and informal vendors selling bottled water and arepas to visiting families. Graffiti on nearby walls alternates between gang symbols and calls for justice. Inside, conditions are still described as overcrowded and violent. The OVP's 2022 report listed El Rodeo among the country's most high-risk prisons for deaths, injuries, and ongoing criminal operations. For viewers in the USA or Europe, the story of El Rodeo may seem like a dystopian thriller, but it is drawn from official reports, NGO monitoring, and on-the-ground journalism. It shows how, in some countries, prisons become the command centers of organized crime rather than its endpoint. As the sun sets over Guatire, the hills turn gold and the prison's watchtowers cast long shadows over the crowd of waiting relatives. Rumors ripple through the line. A new PRAN has taken over a wing, a shipment of weapons has arrived, another riot is brewing. No one knows which story will break out next. All they know is that once the gates close, the state's authority stops and another begins. And somewhere inside, hidden in a sealed cell block off limits even to guards, a former cartel lieutenant, transferred from another prison after the Tocorón raid, is said to be compiling a list of his outside contacts. If that list ever emerged, it could shake the government. But for now, it's just a whisper, another secret behind the walls of El Rodeo. Prison 4 of the 10 most dangerous prisons in the world, where the cartels rule. Chapter 4, Tocorón Prison, Aragua, Venezuela. Subscribe, like, and comment before this video vanishes, because the story of Tocorón Prison isn't just another riot. It's about a criminal empire hiding in plain sight, inside a Venezuelan prison the world thought it understood. At the edge of Maracay in Venezuela's Aragua state sits Tocorón Prison, officially Centro Penitenciario de Tocorón, a place once designed for a few hundred inmates that evolved into the headquarters of one of Latin America's most feared gangs, the Tren de Aragua. For more than a decade, this prison operated as a parallel city-state. Inmates ran businesses, built a nightclub, kept a zoo with exotic animals, and coordinated drug and human smuggling routes across South America. all while guards patrolled only the perimeter. By the late 2010s, journalists and NGOs like the Venezuelan Prison Observatory (OVP) reported that Tocorón held about 7,000 prisoners in space meant for 750. Inside, the Tren de Aragua's leader, known as Niño Guerrero, acted as a prison boss, collecting taxes from every activity. Inmates who couldn't pay were punished or expelled from the better cell blocks. Families visiting inmates paid fees to enter, to use facilities, even to bring in food. Cocaine, weapons, motorcycles, and cash moved freely inside. Photographs smuggled out showed swimming pools, baseball fields, and high-end restaurants inside the walls. The prison became so notorious that Venezuelans joked about it as a criminal Disneyland. But behind the spectacle was a ruthless gang with tentacles reaching into extortion rackets, illegal gold mining, human trafficking, and cross-border drug shipments. Investigators in Colombia, Chile, and Peru linked Tren de Aragua operatives to crimes ordered from Tocorón. For years, the state tolerated or denied this reality. Then, in September 2023, the Venezuelan government launched a surprise raid involving thousands of soldiers and police. Officially called Operation Liberation, it was billed as a move to recover control of Tocorón. Helicopters hovered overhead. Armored vehicles sealed off the perimeter. Families were evacuated. Soldiers flooded the yards. What they found shocked even seasoned officials. According to BBC and AP reports, they uncovered luxury accommodations, tunnels, ammunition caches, grenades, a zoo with flamingos and pumas, an underground swimming pool, and a nightclub named Tokyo. They seized hundreds of cell phones, computers, and ledgers documenting Tren de Aragua's operations. Yet the gang's top leaders, including Niño Guerrero, had vanished just before the raid. Opposition politicians and NGO monitors alleged that someone had tipped them off. The raid ended without a pitched battle. Most inmates surrendered or fled. Officially, no one was killed. Unofficially, locals reported gunfire in surrounding hills as fugitives scattered. Human Rights Watch and OVP noted that many prisoners were transferred to other facilities, but some simply disappeared. The government called the operation a success. Critics called it a staged spectacle that allowed the gang to relocate its command center elsewhere. For Venezuelans, the lesson was chilling. If a gang can build a kingdom inside a prison with a zoo and a nightclub, what else can it do on the outside? For neighboring countries already dealing with Tren de Aragua cells, the raid confirmed their worst fears. The gang's leadership was now at large. Today, Tocorón stands half empty, patrolled by soldiers. Official tours show empty cells and seized contraband. But former inmates tell journalists that smaller Tocoróns exist in other prisons, new strongholds for Tren de Aragua. The gang continues to grow across borders, from Chile to Colombia, still coordinating crimes from hidden bases. Outside the prison gates in Aragua, the road is lined with bullet-scarred walls and faded murals of saints. Locals speak in low voices about the raid, about the animals that vanished, about the bosses who slipped away. No one knows exactly where Niño Guerrero is now. As dusk falls, a single helicopter circles above the compound. In a nearby safe house, a USB drive reportedly containing the gang's financial records changes hands between two men, one a soldier, the other a civilian. If that drive ever reaches investigators, it could expose years of collusion. But tonight it's just another secret on the move, like the men who once ran Tocorón. Prison 5 of 10 most dangerous prisons in the world, where the cartels rule. Lurigancho Prison, Lima, Peru. Subscribe, like, and comment right now before this video disappears, because what you're about to hear about Lurigancho Prison in Peru is a story the authorities can't fully control, a story of gangs, overcrowding, and a hidden empire inside the walls. On the outskirts of Lima, behind faded perimeter walls and rusting watchtowers, lies Lurigancho Prison, officially penal establishment of Lurigancho. It's Peru's largest and most infamous penitentiary. Designed for around 2,500 inmates, by the 2010s it routinely held over 10,000 men, making it one of the most overcrowded prisons in the Americas. For decades it's been a focal point for drug trafficking, gang violence, and the state's struggle to control its penal system. A prison that became a city. Lurigancho sprawls across dusty grounds dotted with low-rise buildings, improvised shacks, and open-air patios. Inside, life resembles a chaotic marketplace rather than a correctional facility. Inmates run restaurants, barbershops, and mini-markets. Families visit freely, bringing children and food. Soccer matches take place in the yards. But behind the informal economy lies a system of delegados, inmate bosses, who collect fees, enforce rules, and maintain ties to criminal groups outside. Peruvian journalists have documented how drug trafficking thrives here. Cocaine paste and marijuana flow into the prison through corrupt guards, hidden inside food or construction materials. Some cell blocks function as packaging and distribution centers. Inmates affiliated with powerful gangs like Barrio King, or linked to Mexican cartels coordinate smuggling routes from behind bars. Payments are collected via cell phones. Orders for hits or extortion are given during visiting hours. Notorious riots and massacres. Lurigancho's reputation for violence is not new. In 1986, when President Alan Garcia ordered a crackdown on prison uprisings linked to the Shining Path guerrilla movement, simultaneous assaults on 3 prisons, including Lurigancho, left at least 124 inmates dead. Human rights groups later accused the military of summary executions. This event scarred Peru's prison history and cemented Lurigancho's image as a slaughterhouse. Through the 1990s and 2000s, periodic riots and killings continued. In 2002, a dispute between rival factions over control of a drug shipment sparked a fire that killed 6 inmates and injured dozens. In 2013, a gunfight inside left 4 dead and 9 wounded after homemade weapons and firearms were smuggled in. Photographs from these incidents show prisoners wielding machetes and pipes, bodies lying on blood-stained concrete, and guards waiting for reinforcements before intervening. In 2016, Peru's Ombudsman's office warned that Lurigancho had become a powder keg of overcrowding, corruption, and gang dominance. That same year, the government transferred more than 1,000 high-risk inmates to new maximum security facilities like Calapalca and Piedras Gordas. But these transfers only shifted, not solved, the problem. Many gang leaders maintain their influence remotely, using visitors and phones to direct operations. Parallel justice system. One of Lurigancho's most striking features is its internal court system. Inmates accused of breaking informal rules, theft, failure to pay protection fees, disrespecting gang leaders, are tried in tribunals run by prisoner delegates. Punishments range from beatings to forced labor to expulsion from certain pavilions. Some sections are off-limits to guards, who negotiate entry with the inmate bosses. This system emerged partly because of state neglect. With only a handful of guards for thousands of inmates, official control is minimal. In practice, the state has outsourced internal order to the prisoners themselves. This creates a perverse incentive. Gangs gain legitimacy as maintainers of order, while expanding their criminal activities. Human stories amid chaos. For viewers, the statistics are staggering, but the human stories are more gripping. Inmates convicted of minor crimes share cells with hardened traffickers. Young men awaiting trial for petty theft are recruited as runners or lookouts for drug bosses. Families visiting on weekends navigate extortion checkpoints inside, paying tolls to move between pavilions. Women smuggle in food, medicine, or contraband under pressure from inmate networks. Some prisoners try to resist. NGOs and religious groups run rehabilitation programs, workshops, and schools. There are accounts of inmates who learned trades, earned degrees, and escaped gang life. But these efforts operate in the shadow of a larger economy dominated by illicit money. Former guards have testified to investigative journalists that they were offered bribes to ignore drug shipments or to allow cell phones, knives, or even firearms inside. International links. Lurigancho's criminal networks don't stop at Peru's borders. Authorities have linked inmates to trafficking rings supplying Mexican cartels, Brazilian gangs, and European markets. In 2018, Peruvian police dismantled a network that was using Lurigancho as a command center for cocaine shipments to Spain. The case underscored how a prison intended to incapacitate criminals had become a hub for global organized crime. Pandemic riot and continuing crisis. During the COVID-19 pandemic, conditions worsened. In April 2020, a riot broke out as inmates demanded better health care and testing after several suspected cases. Gunfire erupted. At least 9 inmates were killed and dozens injured. Guards later said the prisoners had seized weapons from the armory. Videos posted online showed smoke rising from cell blocks and inmates chanting for justice. Peru's government promised reforms. Some modular units were built and transfers increased. But by 2022, the National Penitentiary Institute (INP) admitted that overcrowding remained severe, corruption endemic, and Lurigancho still critical. Journalists visiting the perimeter described seeing new shacks built inside, graffiti marking gang territory, and visitors openly negotiating fees with inmates at the gate. A prison as a warning. Lurigancho encapsulates the themes of this series: how a prison becomes not the end of crime but its incubator. Its sheer size and chaos make it difficult for the state to reassert control. As long as guards are underpaid, families dependent on inmate-run markets, and gangs able to reach outside networks, the cycle continues. In the evenings from a nearby hill, you can see the prison's lights like a small town. Music drifts from some pavilions, punctuated by shouts. The perimeter fence is patched with barbed wire but full of gaps. Beyond it, Lima's sprawl stretches to the horizon, and with it the supply lines of cocaine, extortion, and contraband that tie the prison to the outside world. According to a 2023 investigative report in El Comercio, a confidential INP memo warned of a plan by two rival groups inside Lurigancho to stage a coordinated uprising timed with a mass transfer. The memo listed names of inmates linked to Mexican cartels and even a Peruvian politician under investigation. But the memo leaked before the operation. Transfers were delayed. Officially nothing happened. Unofficially, guards reported unusual movement in certain pavilions. Cell phones were confiscated. A hidden tunnel was discovered under a laundry room. And then the memo vanished from INPE servers. As night falls, a guard at Tower 3 radios in a sighting. 3 masked men on the roof of Pavilion 5, shining flashlights toward the perimeter. A senior officer orders a lockdown. But by the time reinforcements arrive, the roof is empty. Only a scrap of paper remains taped to a water tank. This is just the beginning. Prison 6 of the 10 most dangerous prisons in the world, where the cartels rule. Chapter 6, Altiplano Federal Prison, El Altiplano, Mexico. Subscribe, like, and comment now before this video disappears, because what you're about to hear about Mexico's most secure prison will make you question whether any fortress can hold the cartels. High on the windswept plains of central Mexico, just outside Almoloya de Juarez in the state of Mexico, sits Centro Federal de Readaptación Social No. 1, Altiplano. Known simply as El Altiplano, it was built in 1991 as Mexico's premier maximum security facility. Its concrete walls and underground passageways are designed to hold the nation's most dangerous criminals, cartel bosses, kidnappers, and mass murderers. Yet even here, cartel influence and audacious escapes have challenged the state's authority. Fortress on the plain. Altiplano's design is clinical. The prison is ringed by 2.5-meter thick reinforced concrete, motion sensors, infrared cameras, and multiple perimeter fences. Cells are windowless, 4 by 4 meters with solid steel doors. Prisoners are moved through tunnels under constant surveillance. Airspace above is restricted. Officials once boasted it was escape-proof. But as Mexico's drug war intensified in the 2000s, Altiplano became a showcase for the country's deepest problem. The cartel's reach into every level of society. Inmates included leaders of the Gulf Cartel, Los Zetas, La Familia Michoacana, and most famously Joaquin El Chapo Guzman of the Sinaloa Cartel. El Chapo's 2001 escape, Puente Grande. Guzman had already humiliated authorities once. In 2001 he escaped from Puente Grande prison in Jalisco, reportedly hidden in a laundry cart with the help of corrupt guards and officials. After more than a decade as Mexico's most wanted man, he was recaptured in 2014 and sent to Altiplano, billed as Mexico's Guantanamo, the place where no one could get out. The 2015 tunnel escape. Then, on July 11, 2015, history repeated itself in even more spectacular fashion. Around 8:52 p.m., surveillance cameras in Guzman's cell captured him pacing, slipping behind a privacy screen near his shower, and then vanishing. Guards discovered a hole in the shower floor leading to a mile-long ventilated tunnel equipped with lighting, rails, and a modified motorcycle on tracks. The tunnel surfaced in a half-built house outside the prison. It had been dug over months by cartel engineers, right under the noses of federal authorities. The escape stunned the world. How could anyone dig a sophisticated tunnel from outside to inside Mexico's highest security prison without detection? Investigations later implicated at least a dozen officials. Some were arrested. Others vanished. The event underscored the Sinaloa cartel's engineering prowess and deep network of corrupt contacts. Recapture and extradition. Guzman was recaptured in January 2016 in Los Mochis, Sinaloa, after a bloody firefight. He was returned briefly to Altiplano under heightened security, then moved to another prison and finally extradited to the United States in January 2017. His trial in New York exposed layers of corruption inside Mexican law enforcement and prisons. Other notorious inmates and incidents. Altiplano has housed Zetas leaders like Miguel Ángel Treviño Morales, Z40, and Gulf Cartel boss Ojirel Cardenas Guillen. According to Mexico's National Human Rights Commission, CNDH, Although Altiplano is more orderly than many state prisons, issues persist. Allegations of guard abuse, contraband cell phones, and attempts to bribe staff. In 2012, authorities foiled a plan by inmates to kidnap a warden's family. In 2018, a group of guards was arrested for allegedly smuggling phones and drugs to high-profile prisoners. Cartel reach inside the fortress. Altiplano is not a chaotic bazaar like Lurigancho or Tocorón. It is a fortress. But the cartel's power shows in different ways. Elaborate legal maneuvers, bribery of staff, infiltration of construction contracts, and the ability to coordinate on the outside even while incarcerated. Mexican journalists have documented how imprisoned bosses send coded messages through lawyers and visitors. Authorities periodically transfer inmates to break up networks, but influence persists. Symbol of a larger war. For viewers, Altiplano's story illustrates that security technology alone cannot stop organized crime. When engineers can dig a mile-long tunnel with ventilation and rails, when officials can be bribed or intimidated, a prison's walls mean little. The 2015 escape became a global meme, but for Mexicans it was a national embarrassment and a window into how deeply the Sinaloa cartel had penetrated the state. The human cost. Guards at Altiplano work under constant pressure. Some live in secure housing compounds to protect their families. Journalists covering the prison have received threats. Former inmates have testified to psychological strain in solitary cells. Families of prisoners endure long, invasive searches and travel hundreds of kilometers for brief visits. In late 2022, Mexican media reported that construction had begun on a new underground drainage system beneath Altiplano. Officially, it's to prevent flooding. Unofficially, some staff fear it could provide another escape route if corrupt contractors are involved. An anonymous letter sent to a Mexico City newspaper claimed that a Project Phoenix, a plan for a new breakout, was underway involving several cartel leaders and rogue officials. Authorities dismissed the letter as a hoax. But in December 2022, inspectors discovered an unauthorized cavity beneath a maintenance building near cell block C. The hole had been partially filled in with cement, but sensors showed an echo beneath. The investigation was sealed. No public statement was made. As night falls on the high plain, Altiplano's floodlights blaze across empty fields. Inside, the cell doors lock with mechanical clanks. In one windowless cell, an unnamed inmate rolls up a hand-drawn map and hides it in a hollowed-out law book. He whispers to another through the vent, "Everything is ready." Prison 7 of the 10 most dangerous prisons in the world, where the cartels rule. Chapter 7, Apodaca Prison, Nuevo Leon, Mexico. Subscribe, like, and comment right now before this video gets taken down, because the massacre inside Apodaca Prison shocked even a country accustomed to cartel violence. An hour's drive from Monterrey, in the northern industrial state of Nuevo Leon, sits Centro de Readaptación Social No. 2, Apodaca Prison. Built to hold a few thousand inmates, by 2012 it had become one of Mexico's most overcrowded and gang-infested facilities. Officials warned it was a ticking bomb. That bomb went off on February 19, 2012, in one of the bloodiest episodes of Mexico's drug war. Background: rival cartels behind bars. By the early 2010s, Mexico's northeast was a battlefield between the Gulf Cartel and its former enforcers, Los Zetas. Their war spilled into every corner of society, including the prisons. Inside Apodaca, inmates loyal to each cartel were segregated on paper but not in practice. Guards were outnumbered and underpaid. Corruption was endemic. A 2011 inspection by Mexico's National Human Rights Commission (CNDH) listed Apodaca as high risk for riots and killings. The massacre of February 2012. At about 2 a.m. on February 19, a riot broke out between the two factions. Officially, it began as a fight between inmates in cell block C. In reality, investigators later concluded it was a coordinated attack by Zetas inmates against their Gulf Cartel rivals, aided by corrupt guards. According to Nuevo Leon authorities and later federal investigations, Zetas inmates used keys provided by staff to open cells holding Gulf Cartel prisoners. They armed themselves with improvised weapons and took control of parts of the prison. For more than an hour, they slaughtered their rivals with knives, clubs, and makeshift spears. Some victims were strangled, others were burned. When guards finally regained control, 44 inmates lay dead, most of them Gulf Cartel members. 12 others were wounded. The killers then opened another door and helped 29 Zetas inmates escape, walking them out through a gate controlled by complicit guards. The event was so brazen that President Felipe Calderón publicly called it a tragedy and an outrage. Investigation and fallout. The massacre triggered national and international headlines. Families gathered outside the prison, holding up photographs of missing relatives. Some learned their loved ones had been killed, others learned they had escaped. Human rights groups condemned the state's failure to protect inmates. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights in Mexico urged an investigation into official complicity. Authorities arrested the prison director, the security chief, and at least 15 guards for aiding the escape and massacre. Many later admitted under questioning that they had been threatened or bribed by the Zetas. The state government replaced Apodaca's entire staff. Yet critics noted that such purges were temporary. Without structural reforms, new staff would face the same pressures. Symbol of a deeper problem. Apodaca's massacre highlighted how, in Mexico's prison system, the cartels' war didn't stop at the gate. They brought it with them, and sometimes the state acted as an unwitting accomplice. Similar incidents had occurred in other facilities, including Topo Chico and Gomez Palacio, but Apodaca's scale and the number of dead made it a turning point. In the months after, Nuevo Leon transferred hundreds of inmates to federal prisons. Families of the dead filed lawsuits. The CNDH issued recommendations to improve security and oversight. Yet by 2015, reports surfaced of new contraband networks inside Apodaca, suggesting that the underlying dynamics had not changed. The human face of the massacre. Survivors described hiding under bunks while screams echoed through the cell block. One inmate told El Norte newspaper that guards looked the other way while the killings happened. Mothers outside recounted receiving phone calls from inside as their sons begged for help. For many, Apodaca symbolized not just cartel violence but the state's inability to keep even convicted criminals alive in its custody. In late 2021, investigative reporters from Preciso obtained leaked internal memos suggesting that high-profile Zeta successors were being quietly transferred back into Apodaca after serving time elsewhere, re-establishing old networks. One memo mentioned a special storage room built under the new workshop area, but blueprints of the room were missing from official records. Authorities denied the memo's authenticity. Then in January 2022, a small fire broke out in the workshop area. Guards extinguished it quickly. But when firefighters arrived, they found a freshly dug tunnel beneath a collapsed section of floor, leading toward the perimeter. The tunnel was only 3 meters long, but wide enough for a person to crawl through. As night falls over Nuevo Leon, the lights of Apodaca prison glow against the dark hills. Families still wait outside on visiting days, scanning lists. Inside, new bosses reorganize, new guards arrive, and old debts are remembered. And somewhere beneath the workshop, the beginnings of another escape route may be taking shape. Prison 8 of the 10 most dangerous prisons in the world, where the cartels rule. Chapter 8, La Joyita Prison, Panama. Subscribe, like, and comment before we go any further, because what you're about to hear about La Joyita Prison sounds like a war story, but every detail is real and documented. Just east of Panama City, surrounded by scrubland and heat shimmer, stands La Joyita Prison, one of the 3 penitentiaries in Panama's La Joya prison complex. Built in the 1990s to house roughly 1,700 inmates, by the 2010s it was crammed with over 3,000 prisoners, including local gang leaders, Colombian traffickers and cartel intermediaries moving cocaine through the Darien corridor. The result? A powder keg of overcrowding, corruption and heavily armed gangs behind bars. A cocaine highway behind bars. Panama is a critical transit point for cocaine moving from Colombia to North America and Europe. Many of the traffickers caught along this route end up in La Joyita. Over time, they've turned the prison into an extension of the trade. Journalists and NGOs have documented how weapons, drugs and cell phones flow in through corrupt guards, hidden compartments in food and even drones. Rival gangs, including factions tied to Colombian and Mexican cartels, control different cell blocks and operate extortion rackets. The December 2019 massacre. On December 17, 2019, La Joyita erupted into one of the deadliest prison killings in Panama's history. According to Panama's national police, inmates affiliated with the gang Los Baghdad smuggled at least 5 AK-47 rifles, 3 pistols and 2 revolvers into the prison. In the middle of the day during visiting hours, they opened fire on rivals from the gang Los Cajeteros, inside a cell block. Panamanian television showed chaotic scenes. Inmates running for cover, families screaming outside the gates, police scrambling to respond. By the time security forces regained control, 15 inmates were dead and 14 wounded. Authorities later admitted the weapons had been brought in piece by piece over months. The massacre exposed the depth of corruption and the state's loss of control. Aftermath and revelations. President Laurentino Cortizo publicly condemned the incident, calling it unacceptable that assault rifles were inside a prison. The government fired several senior prison officials and announced stricter searches. Yet in 2020 and 2021, further incidents occurred at La Joyita, including knife fights and smaller shootings. In 2021, the Ministry of Public Security said it had confiscated over 1,800 weapons from Panamanian prisons in 3 years, an astonishing number for facilities supposedly under lock and key. NGOs like Human Rights Everywhere Panama and the Catholic Church's prison ministry have long warned about inhumane conditions and gang dominance. They report that some inmates pay for protection and better living conditions, while others are forced into carrying out hits or smuggling contraband for gangs. Guards have been caught participating in extortion and trafficking schemes. Conditions inside. Visitors describe La Joyita as a maze of cell blocks, makeshift stalls and open-air yards where inmates lounge under sweltering heat. Water shortages are common. Medical care is minimal. Gang symbols mark the walls. Prisoners openly display tattoos of their affiliations. Some cell blocks have improvised gyms, stores, or kitchens. Others are grim, windowless dorms. Families bring food and clothes on visiting days but must pass through a gauntlet of checks, and sometimes bribes, to reach their relatives. International reach. Because Panama sits at the choke point of the cocaine trade, La Joyita houses not only Panamanian gangsters but also Colombian, Dominican, and occasionally Mexican traffickers. Police intelligence reports have linked some inmates to the Clan del Golfo and Sinaloa cartel. Orders for shipments and killings have allegedly been coordinated from inside La Joyita using smuggled phones and corrupt intermediaries. Attempts at reform. After the 2019 massacre, the government created a Security and Prison Intelligence Unit to intercept contraband and break up gangs. Some high-risk inmates were transferred to other facilities. Yet overcrowding persists. In 2022, a United Nations rapporteur on torture visited and noted serious deficiencies in infrastructure and safety. Panama's own ombudsman has called La Joyita a parallel criminal economy operating under the state's nose. In mid-2023, Panamanian media reported on an internal police memo warning that a new alliance between remnants of Los Baghdad and a Colombian group was forming inside La Joyita, planning a mass breakout using weapons smuggled in by corrupt guards. Authorities downplayed the report. But 2 months later, during a routine inspection, guards discovered a hidden cache of ammunition under a concrete slab in cell block 6, enough to arm dozens of men. As dusk settles over the prison complex, families still wait outside with baskets of food. Inside, rival gangs redraw their lines. A guard on the night shift notices fresh graffiti on a wall, a train emerging from a tunnel with the words "Pronto," soon. He radios his supervisor but no one answers. Prison 9 of the 10 most dangerous prisons in the world, where the cartels rule. Los Tex Prison, Miranda, Venezuela. Subscribe, like, and comment before this video gets removed, because the story of Los Tex Prison is a lesson in what happens when the state gives up control to the gangs. About 30 kilometers southwest of Caracas, in the hills of Miranda State, stands Centro Penitenciario Los Tex. Built in the mid-20th century for a few hundred inmates, by the 2010s it held over 2,000 prisoners. Human rights groups like the Venezuelan Prison Observatory, OVP, repeatedly labeled it one of the most dangerous facilities in the country, a place where PRANs, inmate bosses, exercised full control over life inside, from food to justice to murder. The rise of the PRAN system. By the late 2000s, Venezuelan prisons had developed a unique and deadly governance model. In the absence of sufficient guards, inmates organized under PRANs who collected causas, protection payments, from fellow prisoners and visitors. Los Tex became a showcase for this system. Its PRANs set up their own courts to punish rule breakers. Guards patrolled only the perimeter and negotiated entry into cell blocks. Journalists who managed to enter described a parallel economy. Shops selling food and clothes, improvised gyms, even cockfighting pits. But behind the commerce was extortion, forced labor, and the smuggling of weapons and drugs. The OVP documented that Los Tex housed high-profile gang leaders who continued directing crimes outside its walls. Notorious incidents. One of the most infamous episodes occurred on October 27, 2010, when a riot left 29 inmates dead and 75 injured. According to OVP reports, rival groups armed with guns and grenades fought for control of a cell block after the transfer of a high-ranking PRAN disrupted the balance of power. Guards were unable to enter for hours. The firefight was so intense that neighbors in nearby housing developments heard the explosions. In 2012 and 2013, further clashes broke out as new gangs emerged. Videos smuggled out showed inmates firing automatic weapons inside crowded dorms. In 2014, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights issued precautionary measures urging Venezuela to protect inmates' lives at Los Teques. By then, the prison had become a symbol of state abdication. Conditions inside. Visitors describe entering a world apart. Families bring food, medicine, and sometimes contraband. Inmates openly carry knives or pistols. Some live in relative comfort with mattresses, fans, and cell phones. Others sleep on bare concrete. Water and sanitation are poor. Diseases spread quickly. Human rights activists say children have been present during visiting hours when violence erupted. The state's response. After the 2010 massacre, Venezuela's Ministry of Prisons promised reform, new infrastructure, and the disarmament of inmates. In 2011 it created the Ministry of People's Power for Prison Services under Iris Varela, aiming to humanize prisons. But the OVP's annual reports continued to list Los Teques among the deadliest facilities, citing killings, escapes, and rampant contraband. In 2015, authorities tried to transfer the main pran Wilmer Brizuela, Wilmito, but the move triggered protests inside. Rumors spread that the gang would retaliate by attacking guards' families. The transfer was delayed. This pattern, attempted reform followed by threats, repeated again and again. International attention. Foreign press rarely enters Los Teques, but leaked photos show murals of gang symbols, weapons hidden in walls, and improvised bunk beds stacked 3 high. The prison has been compared to Tocorón on a smaller scale, less flashy but equally violent. Some analysts call it a training ground for future prans. In late 2022, a whistleblower inside Venezuela's prison ministry leaked documents to a Miami-based outlet showing that Los Teques was housing several Colombian nationals linked to the Clan del Golfo. The documents alleged that these inmates were negotiating with a Venezuelan pran to create a new trafficking route through the Caribbean. The leak included names of mid-level officials supposedly receiving kickbacks. Shortly after the leak, the whistleblower disappeared. In January 2023, families waiting outside Los Teques noticed increased activity. Trucks arriving at night, guards erecting temporary barriers, and strange markings on the yard walls, arrows pointing toward the perimeter. The OVP issued a warning about a possible mass escape or violent transfer. The government said nothing. One night in February, neighbors heard a low rumble like distant thunder. Some claimed they saw a flash underground near the prison's edge. By morning, officials announced that maintenance work was underway. No one could confirm what was happening inside. But for those who know Los Teques, the silence was ominous, a sign that another deadly chapter might be about to begin. Number 10 of the most dangerous prisons in the world, where the cartels rule. Chapter 10, San Quentin State Prison, California, USA. Subscribe, like, and comment right now before this video ends, because what you're about to hear about San Quentin is not the sanitized version you see on TV. This is the real, documented history of one of America's most notorious prisons and the gangs that used it as a command center. On the edge of the San Francisco Bay, just north of the Golden Gate Bridge, stands San Quentin State Prison. Founded in 1852, it is California's oldest prison, its name synonymous with death row. While not a cartel stronghold in the Latin American sense, San Quentin has for decades been a cradle and command post for some of the most powerful prison gangs in the United States, gangs that coordinate with cartels and street crews beyond the walls. The birthplace of prison gangs. By the 1950s and 1960s, San Quentin was already notorious for violence and overcrowding. In the 1960s and 1970s, it became a crucible for the formation of organized prison gangs like the Mexican Mafia, LAIM, and Nuestra Familia. Both groups drew on inmates from California's barrios and had ties to drug trafficking networks inside and outside prison. Their rivalry spilled blood across California's penitentiaries for decades. Scholars and law enforcement officials cite San Quentin as a key site where these gangs developed their codes, recruitment systems, and discipline. Riots and killings. San Quentin has seen some of the bloodiest incidents in U.S. prison history. In August 1971, activist George Jackson, a Black Panther and co-founder of the Black Guerrilla family, was shot dead during an escape attempt. The event triggered a bloody riot that left 3 guards and 2 inmates dead. The prison went into lockdown for weeks. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, stabbings and assaults between rival gang members and on staff were common. In 2005, a large-scale riot broke out between nearly 100 inmates, leaving 42 injured. Prison officials said the fight involved members of the Mexican mafia and the northern structure, aligned with Nuestra Familia. Weapons, handmade knives, shanks and clubs, were recovered afterward. In 2015, another melee injured dozens. Cartel connections. Although San Quintin is a state prison, not a federal facility, its gangs have deep ties to cartel operations. The Mexican mafia in particular has long served as a bridge between California's street gangs and Mexican suppliers. Federal indictments and DEA reports have described how LAE members in prison broker drug deals, extortion rackets, and even killings on the outside using contraband cell phones and coded messages through visitors and lawyers. Nuestra Familia, born out of San Quintin and Folsom prisons, developed its own constitution and military-style chain of command. It too maintained relationships with drug suppliers in Mexico. Even the Black Guerrilla family, though ideologically different, became involved in drug trafficking in California and beyond. Reform and reality. San Quintin today also houses educational and rehabilitation programs, and it has been the subject of documentaries showing inmates earning degrees or performing Shakespeare. But the dark undercurrent remains. California's Office of the Inspector General has repeatedly found lapses in contraband control, including cell phones smuggled by staff. In 2020, during the COVID-19 pandemic, San Quintin suffered one of the worst prison outbreaks in the U.S., with more than 2,000 infections and at least 28 inmate deaths, exposing overcrowding and poor health conditions. Death row. San Quintin holds California's only death row for male inmates. As of 2022, more than 600 men were housed there, including serial killers, mass murderers and cartel hitmen. Executions have been on hold since 2006 due to legal challenges, but the specter of death row adds to the prison's grim reputation. In 2023, the California Department of Corrections began dismantling death row, transferring condemned inmates into the general population under a condemned inmate transfer pilot program. Some law enforcement officials quietly warned that moving high-ranking gang members and cartel-linked killers into other facilities could destabilize the prison system. Internal memos leaked to the Los Angeles Times described fears of new alliances forming between Mexican mafia veterans and up-and-coming traffickers in other prisons. In March 2024, a contraband phone seized at San Quintin contained encrypted messages referencing a Project Gateway, a plan to coordinate shipments from the border using contacts on the outside. Investigators haven't publicly disclosed who the messages belong to. As the sun sets over the bay, the prison's old stone walls glow orange. Sailboats glide past as if nothing is happening. But inside, the same forces that shaped California's underworld for decades are still at work, writing a new chapter in the long story of crime and punishment, a chapter that could spill far beyond the prison gates.